Hey guys, it is November 19th, 2025 here with your after hours recap. Today was a fairly straightforward day. What you had was a little bit of sitting on the hands for a little bit, just kind of waiting on NVIDIA to report earnings. And sure enough, in after hours, they reported earnings. Really, really nice push, 196 bucks. Back above the 50 simple moving average, gapping above the 20. That is super, super nice to see. Today I did get knocked out of a TSM when this thing was ramping in the morning. And then as soon as it kind of started to fail, I actually put TSM back on. So I cut it effectively right at flat, right around 284 bucks, which is where I was in before. Then I put it back in around 282 and a half, only to see this thing roll over. But then as soon as we started to regain some strength into the close, I was like, okay, I'm not going to hold a flat position, into NVIDIA's earnings, especially not a semiconductor. That turned out to be the right idea because TSM gapped up. I did go ahead and buy some NBIS as an undercut and reclaim. So if you look at this left side low, 1022, this thing had a low of 94 and a half, call it 94.63. Today we started to reclaim that level. I did go ahead and get long effectively as a 5-minute opening range break. And then, this thing just kind of hung out all day long. Almost took out really that $92 level with a close underneath that $92 level, but really just tapped it and then turned right back around. I was looking more for like a break of 92 and a kind of a 5-minute close below, and that would have gotten me out. And then all this thing did was rebound very nicely into the close, gave me some cushion to hold it overnight, and then really, really nice reaction on NVIDIA. And that was kind of the story of the day. You had NVIDIA kind of come on in and save the data center stocks. Like if you look at a NBIS, or you look at a CoreWeave, or you look at IREN, et cetera. If you just kind of go down the board, IREN was looking fairly weak today. And then all of a sudden, going into NVIDIA's earnings, they just ripped this thing right back up. And I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but ultimately, it could be that, we get some kind of, look, a lot of charts, when you look IREN, you look at CIFR, you look at the nuclears, and we'll talk about the nuclears in a second. These charts got absolutely murdered over the last couple of weeks. So a bit of a relief bounce, and then maybe things tighten up. I think that, that would be very, very constructive. I did do a nice job of getting myself into NBIS, which was good to have, and then really 2 flat trades effectively on TSM. So I'm not really complaining too much about that at the moment. Unfortunately, I did miss Google this morning, and I talked about it in last night's watchlist video. I thought that buying it, not necessarily over 11.17's high, but buying it over yesterday's high, that 289 level, looked pretty dang good. And then huge ramp. Obviously, market was doing what market was doing, was selling off just a touch, was pulling in Google. But then again, NVIDIA lifted all boats, and we're right back underneath 300 bucks in the after hour session. Like I said, I do not know what is going to happen tomorrow with NVIDIA and with the market, but you kind of look at the market here, and you could see a potential, a bit of a multi-day bounce potentially, as long as we can reclaim the 50 simple moving average, which we have done, 607. I don't necessarily want to be too negative. The longer we would be living underneath the 50 simple moving average, the worse it could become. But we did get, about a 7% correction to the lows, 7 and change. And that might be it, right? I was personally hoping that, we would kind of pull back, bounce up, make another lower low, bounce up, make another lower low, eventually go retest lower, just based on all the charts that are destroyed. But if semiconductors are going to act well, then that is a big enough group in the market that could really, like I said, lift a lot of ships. Apple hasn't really gone anywhere. There is still some technical damage going on with something like Meta. Microsoft could use a little bit of a lifeline. Amazon could maybe use a little bit of a lifeline. But even in Amazon today, nice little bounce. But again, we are living underneath the 50 simple moving average. This is just too much technical damage here for me to kind of go and trying to hunt the lows on some of these names. So for me, just kind of leaving it alone. Excuse my little pup. He decided that it was just time to start playing now. Let me get this. So just for me, I also did go ahead and take a short on Netflix when we were losing the 200 simple moving average today. This does feel like a potential start of a stage 4 downtrend. You effectively get a small little gap down, and then it was just as simple as hitting it as soon as you were rejecting the 200 simple moving average. So I'm shorting this thing as soon as it was starting to break down. A little bit of a pop up, but really any retest of that 200 simple moving average, as long as we're not living above it, I will be comfortable being short. And then the nuclears today. There was a bit of news that the government plans on owning some nuclear facilities. And, this name started to bounce a little bit more in the after hours, up to 110. And it wasn't just that one. GEV is also acting fantastic. CEG is also acting fantastic. No, I don't want to use the word fantastic, but a whole heck of a lot better. And then a bit of a gap up overnight. And then just kind of down the list, obviously, ORCL has gotten beaten up quite a bit. And this is a name that, I'm short from 146 bucks. So there's really not a whole lot left for me to do with it. I have covered a grand majority of my position, even as much as sub 100. So there's really not a lot left for me to do on that end. So I thought it was a fairly good day. And I guess we could bring up some of the negatives. You did have Palo Alto report earnings, and then you get a bit of a gap down, about 7 points. What happens there tomorrow? What happens with NVIDIA? The reality is that the market is trying to gap back up above the 50 simple moving average. That is very, very constructive. Or do, traders and institutions use that gap up, as a chance to unwind some more positioning? I really don't know. I mean, there was a moment there when Ethereum, Bitcoin was looking all that much worse. MSTR was down 13%. I want to say at one point almost still finished down 10% on the day. Excuse my little boy. He wants to come say hi. He's just staring at me and he wants a little attention. So that's just kind of my thinking. With that said, let's just kind of start to touch upon a few of these names and what might be good for tomorrow. I think Google still looks pretty dang good. Any kind of pullbacks into rising 60-minute support. You just look at the way that this thing found support on the rising 10, on the rising 20. That is just fantastic. And then a overnight gap up, obviously with NVIDIA. CIEN, this one also still looks pretty constructive, gonna be gapping up as well, and in the very similar group as LITE, and you can just see how LITE acted. Now, I had both of these on watch yesterday. I thought this was a very, very tight day. I wanted a little bit more sideways, but ultimately nice push, a little bit of a failure with the market, almost to be expected. But then at the close, found support right at its opening print, and then ultimately decided to move its way higher. I will continue to keep my eyes on the gold space. I think that NEM, this one did not trigger my alert today. I just kind of had it there over 11.14's high, and I will continue to think that might be a pretty good spot, 89.50. If the market wants to get going, I will keep my eyes on NEM. AEM is another one that I will also keep my eyes on. I really like how tight this thing's trading. This one tried taking out that high, but ultimately pulled back a little bit today. And you're just going to need gold to act a little bit better if those are going to act, proper. Frog was a nice move today on earnings. I thought that maybe this one could have been, a high volume close setup, and 60 bucks was the spot, but even really right over yesterday's high was a pretty good level to watch. Frog will definitely be one that I keep on my radar. Really, really nice uptrend going on here, and nice gap up on earnings, nice little pullback, acting fairly strong in what was a weak market. Today the market starts to bounce, and even when the market was acting poorly, you could actually see how well this thing was acting for the first few hours in the morning. So definitely one to keep an eye on. Not the most liquid in the world, but one that I can definitely participate in. XOM, I personally loved the gap down and into the 20. We'll see how this thing just continues to build out. Some of these energy stocks got absolutely massive bases. So we'll just kind of take it from there. BE, another one that benefited as well, kind of moving with the powering the AI data center theme. A lot of those names gapped up overnight. Just look at your GEV and CEG. I personally love the way this thing has pulled into the 50. We are no longer extended. Let's see if we can build out a little bit more and maybe tighten up a little bit. There's a chance to potentially play this thing as a higher low over 115.5, but we are going to be gapping up above that. We'll see if in the morning we get a little bit of a pullback and then we start to build higher lows, right? You've gotten about a 7% correction in the market. There's nothing to say that we can't just turn right back up from here. I think that could be completely normal. In my not realistic, but in my dream scenario, we go lower to really reset some of the bigger charts in the market, because just the speculative names have gotten beat up. Really no quality got beat up. And that's fine. I'm not saying that it has to, or that there's any guarantee that it was going to. Really the only quality that got beaten up was Meta, and then recently Amazon. But everything else, for the most part, I would say has hung in there fairly well. CEG, going to leave my eyes on this one. We'll see if this one chooses to build a higher low at some time or at some point. But if we are living over the 50 simple moving average, which is $357, I'm going to remain pretty positive on that name, especially on the news that the government wants to own 10 nuclear facilities. So that will hopefully cut through some of the red tape fairly quickly. And then CEG is an operator of nuclear facilities, so this directly benefits them because, who better to run some of these facilities that are government owned than a Constellation? GEV is another one. Love how big this base is. This thing has just been holding up. Today, this thing started acting well, even when the market was going down. Middle of the day, this thing just kind of kept grinding higher and grinding higher and grinding higher. And then you close, and all of a sudden, you get a gap up above the 50 simple moving average. I don't know that I'm going to chase like a $615 gap up in the morning, but pullbacks against that 50-day, I think, would be viable for me, or really just go in and kind of fill some of the gap almost to today's high could be a fairly interesting spot. NBIS, one that I already own, will continue to keep this on watch. This is gapping up $103, $104. Kind of in my ideal scenario, we ramp up into like that 108 to 110 level. That allows me to de-risk some of this position, and then I'll just kind of let it work. Again, in an ideal scenario, I get to de-risk on some of this push. It pushes a little bit more, it tightens up for me, and then I get to add when it's living back above the 50 simple moving average. Oracle, I was talking about this one today in the room. Obviously hindsight's 2020 with how nice the close was, but I was thinking, what? When it was taking out yesterday's highs, this looks like a fairly low risk spot, right? You start to hold in on that 200 simple moving average. This kind of felt like the spot where you had so much negative news on Oracle and, them being in debt and construction on their AI, they're underwater, and et cetera, all of the bad news in the world. But ultimately, you are hanging out above the 200 simple moving average, and that is the final line in the sand. So I felt, hey, you know what? You can almost take a position, and you've got that final line in the sand before you kind of know you have to leave. And Oracle, really nice move in after hours thanks to NVIDIA. So that is definitely one to maybe keep an eye on over the coming days to see if it can build out above that 200 simple moving average. AVGO will not take my eyes off this name. This thing's going to be gapping up 264 and change, so above all key moving averages. Really nice 50 simple moving average undercut and reclaim, so we will just take it from there. Like I said, it could be that market got a little oversold, sentiment was a little bit beaten up, and then now we've got a nice little handful of stocks that can very well lead the way, and led by none other than semiconductors and NVIDIA. I think that would be potentially awesome. And if the market's living above the 50 simple moving average, I'm definitely not going to get negative. And I don't see any reason why the market couldn't rally from there. TSM, another one. This one I actually tried shorting yesterday. I want to say, no, 2 days ago. And then, or was it yesterday? 2 days ago. And then it didn't cover any yesterday. Got stopped out on my piece today. re-added it as well when it started to kind of break down, and then closed it before, before we went into after hours, effectively with a flat trade, small green actually. So really no harm done, and then I did not get caught in this gap up. But we'll continue to leave this thing on watch. Obviously, some of this is very, very sloppy action. So really just need us to reclaim the 20 simple moving average, tighten up for me, and then I would be happy to own this name as well. Tesla is another one, not taking it off my radar. I personally love how this is almost trading as a couple of inside days versus 11/17's high and low. I don't see a ton to do with it right now. Again, we are living below the 50 simple moving average. I love how tight of a day it was. Do I play this as a higher low setup tomorrow? I think it's possible, but it's not lost on me how much overhead supply there is on Tesla. So that's just kind of my thinking right now. And, I will continue to leave Netflix and stocks that are potentially breaking down into stage 4 downtrends. Netflix being one that I'm very, very interested in to play for more of an unwind. You break down on earnings, you start to live under the 200. This can get pretty sloppy pretty quickly. We've seen this picture before. And once again, good to remember, this thing has been in an uptrend for a very, very long time. And with a Netflix, you'll probably also get a bit of an unwind in a Spotify, which looks very similar. So won't be too surprised if these things are breaking down together. So hopefully you guys all had a really good trading day. I know for me it was, pretty decent. Getting an opportunity to catch NBIS on the long side and Netflix on the short side. I'm very much trimmed on all of my speculative names, so I could care less if those names go back to where I initially shorted them. It would make no difference to the overall basically trade that I've had in those names. Very, very small positions. And if we push into declining moving averages and we start to fail, I would be more than happy to potentially add back to those names for some more unwind. But we'll see. Ultimately, if they want to go back up, tighten up, then I could see myself getting bullish, even on the speculative stuff. So we'll just take it one day at a time, and I will see you guys tomorrow morning. Cheers.